Now, don't expect me to vote solidly for Republicans or Democrats.
Democrat Doug Jones just recently won his Alabama Senate race against Republican Roy Moore. Now, before Jones was elected, it wasn't really clear what sort of Democrat he was going to be. Now, he was a little more liberal on the social issues, which is a big deal for Alabama. But in terms of the other issues like Medicare for all or a $15 minimum wage or getting money out of politics, these were all things that Doug Jones was silent on. But now, after a recent CNN interview, I think it's a little more clear what sort of Democrat Doug Jones is going to be. So I'm going to show you a series of, I think it's 6 different clips, where Jones is asked about certain issues and various things relating to what kind of Democrat he's going to be once he's seated, and it's revealing. So let's get to the first clip, and I have to give just a little criticism to this question that Jake Tapper asks, but then we'll get into Doug Jones and his various responses.
Cory Gardner was adamantly opposed to Roy Moore. In fact, he refused to help fund his campaign. But take a look at the statement he released after your victory. Quote, "I hope Senator-elect Doug Jones will do the right thing and truly represent Alabama by choosing to vote with the Senate Republican majority." Now, I know that you're going to vote according to what you think is right, but Alabama is a deeply red state. It went for President Trump by 28 points. Your reelection is just in 3 years. In order to truly represent your state, do you need to consider voting with Republicans on some issues?
Okay, so before I even get to Doug Jones and his response, Jake Tapper here. So I'm kind of conflicted with my own criticism of him because I understand where he's coming from with this question. Because, yeah, there is this idea out there which you could say is a legitimate, real thing, that Alabama is a red state. But this is the problem with this question. He's acting like this win really doesn't mean anything. You're a Democrat who just won this Senate race. But Alabama's still red. So how are you going to appeal to all the Republicans who, I guess, didn't vote enough for you to lose? So do you see the there's this conflation with, okay, yes, I guess Alabama is a red state generally, but Doug Jones winning should account for something. Unless you really want to go out there and say Doug Jones only won this election because he was faced off against a sexual predator, which is also a fair argument. So while I'm kind of on both sides of this issue of my own criticism of Jake Tapper, because the problem I have with these sorts of questions is the framing around it. It's always framed from the right wing. So even if a Democrat wins an election, it doesn't matter. The state is still red. How are you going to appeal to all the red voters? But if a Republican wins an election, how many times have you seen an anchor ask a Republican, how are you going to appeal to progressives? Does that ever happen? So this idea that the Democrats have to keep capitulating to the right is kind of part of the poison and why Democrats keep on capitulating to the right wing, because the media frames it like they keep having to. So while I understand the question and I get where Jake Tapper is coming from, this whole idea of always serving the right wing is bothersome because they didn't come out enough to vote for the Republican to win the election. The Democrat won. So maybe, I don't know, put the interests of the Democrats first above anybody else. But anyways, let's get to Doug Jones' response and how I feel about it.
Do you need to consider voting with Republicans on some issues?
Of course I do. I mean, look, Jake, one of the problems in American politics right now, in my opinion, is that everybody thinks because you're a member of one party or another, you're going to vote a certain way. And that should not be the case, shouldn't ever be the case. I'm going to talk to people on both sides of the aisle, try to figure out what I think is in the best interest of my state and in the country. Now, don't expect me to vote solidly for Republicans or Democrats. I came up with Senator Howell Heflin from Alabama many years ago. He did always said to do the things that he thought was in the best interest of his constituents, which is in the state of Alabama. I don't think anybody should depend on be able to count on my vote for anything. They got to make sure that I'm looking at it, studying it. I'm going to study all sides.
Okay, so look, this answer is not completely terrible if he's telling the truth. So if Doug Jones, if his intention really is to serve his voters, serve Alabama, then cool. I don't think any senator should be held to a standard where they're just completely voting one way. I think they should be allowed to think for themselves and be able to vote either way. But looking at you have to think of this in the current political field right now. So what is the Republican Party offering that would make you want to vote for them? That's where I kind of get lost on his answer here. So in a perfect world where Republicans have, are fighting for real conservative ideals and Democrats are fighting for real progressive ideals, then yeah, I totally understand looking at each issue on its own and voting the way you feel is fair. But the way it actually is right now is the window is so far to the right that even you voting with Democrats 100% of the time, you're still really voting right-wing for a good portion of that. Because a lot of what is being pushed by the Democratic Party is center, if not on the right. So if you're actually voting with Republicans on something, then you are far to the right on whatever you're voting on. Now, I still get his answer overall of him voting for the people, but this is what people like senators like Joe Manchin also say. Joe Manchin always says, I vote in the interest of West Virginia. Okay, but really you don't. You say that, but the interests of West Virginia, the interests that you're talking about, are your donors' interests. Who gives you the money? That's who you're really voting for. So that's why I take issue with this answer, because on the face of it, sure, it sounds great that Doug Jones is deciding to have his votes on the side of whatever benefits Alabama. But what that really means most of the time is that he'll decide to vote with whatever his donors want, whatever his donors in Alabama think is the right way for him to vote. So just keep that in mind. While Doug Jones' answer doesn't sound terrible, it may not actually be what it seems. Now, let's get to the next clip where Doug Jones gets more specific about where he may vote with Republicans on.
Is there an issue or two that you could point to where you think you might vote with the Republicans? I mean, just looking at your position papers, you seem like a Democrat. I don't really see any areas where you might vote with the Republicans.
Well, sure. I mean, look, I think you're going to see an infrastructure bill coming up next year. That's going to be, I think, very important to the people of the state of Alabama. I'm going to try to look at that. I think there's any number of things that you can do. But these big issues, the problem we've got right now is we're looking at these giant issues, a 500-page tax bill that just landed on somebody's desk the other day that nobody really knows all that's in there. The health care bills were the same way. I think there's any number of issues that come up on a daily basis or a weekly basis that we can find common ground on. But that's the main thing, is that a bill or an issue may start out one way, but trying to work with both sides, with both parties, I think is going to be the way to go to try to get things done.
So I don't have too much more to add to this question here, but I just want to address the infrastructure for a second. So Doug Jones says he would vote possibly for an infrastructure bill, which sounds great on the face of it. But the infrastructure proposal that the Republican Party seems to be pushing around is really just about private investors, so that private companies can find their own revenue streams through toll roads and toll bridges. And it's not really about actually investing into poorer communities and fixing roads and replacing leaky water pipes, or places like Flint where they have serious issues with their water. So while it sounds great, the idea of, yes, there definitely needs to be something done on infrastructure, but if it's just about a giveaway to private industry, then you're not really making the progress that you should be making on that issue. Now, one more thing just that Doug Jones mentions there, try to work with both parties, or he wants to try to work with both sides, both parties. That is the strategy the Democratic Party has tried doing for the last 8 years at least. And all it ends up doing is they keep giving in to the right wing. Now, I get in the current position with the Democratic Party having no control, it's kind of out of their hands anyways. But this idea of working with both sides has never really quite worked out for anybody except for wealthy people and massive corporations. So while it sounds good on the face of it, sure, let's work together. The Republican Party has no interest in working together. Their interest is in serving their donors, and if they can pull you along with them, they'll do it. But if not, well, whatever. They can pass their bills anyways. So let's get to clip 4, which gets into a different issue.
You had tremendous support from African-American voters on Tuesday. According to CNN's exit polls, you won the African-American vote by 92%, African-American women even higher. Native Alabaman and NBA legend Charles Barkley was all in on campaigning for you. He told this to me after your victory. Take a listen.
This is a wake-up call for Democrats. They've taken the black vote and the poor vote for granted for a long time. It's time for them to get off their ass and start making life better for black folks and people who are poor.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble hearing you there, Jake.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You said, do you agree?
Do you agree,
yes,
sir?
I think, I don't think you should take anybody's votes for granted. I think it's time that we start looking around. Alabama's a very diverse state. We've got areas that we really need to focus on for jobs and education, the economy, our workforce development, working with Congresswoman Sewell, who was a great partner in this campaign. I think there's a lot of things. I told folks early on in this campaign that everybody needs to do a political reset button and start looking at issues and start voting on those issues rather than political parties.
So again, another very typical answer for a politician. So he kind of says yes to the question that should you pay more attention to black folk and poor people, but he doesn't mention either by name. He doesn't say, yes, we need to pay more attention to the black people in my state and the poor people in my state. He's just like, yeah, we have a very diverse state. We need to pay attention to everybody. There's issues that everybody wants addressed, and we have to pay attention to those issues. Just very unspecific, much like his campaign. So this idea that Doug Jones is going to somehow care about his voters, his Democratic voters, the Democratic base, seems unlikely. Just from these answers, because anybody else, any strong progressive, any actual person, any actual politician that wanted to address these issues would not only just call out the community specifically, but then would get into the actual policies that they want to propose that would address those things. But he doesn't do that. He just talks in generalities. Yes, we have a diverse state, and there's many issues that we need to focus on to help the people of my state. Just unspecific bullshit. So it's not really surprising, seeing as how he ran his campaign, which was basically, I'm not Roy Moore. And I mean, he's not, so that's good. But when it comes to actually being a Democratic senator that will care about the people of Alabama and actually focus on the issues that need to be addressed and not just keep capitulating to the right wing, it seems unlikely that he's going to be that person. So let's get to clip 5 here, which is sort of related to the last clip.
Writer and civil rights activist Shaun King says that you, Senator-elect Jones, you need to appoint at least 2 African Americans to the 4 major positions you need to fill in your Senate office. Can you commit to doing that?
I'm going to commit to having a Senate office both in my state and in D.C. That reflects the diversity of Alabama. We're going to be looking, we've got some great resumes coming in. I've got folks from all over that want to do that. I want to make sure that I have the best staff available. It will absolutely reflect the diversity of the state of Alabama. I'm not going to get bogged down on numbers, but I can promise everyone that we're going to represent the entire state of Alabama.
So, once again, a very unspecific answer. It would have been so easy for Doug Jones to just say, yes, I'm going to hire 2 African Americans to my staff. But no, I promise you my staff will reflect the diversity of my state and blah, blah, blah. Which, you know what? Maybe it will. Maybe he will end up hiring 2 African Americans. But isn't it just easier to say yes and do it? So if you don't know, Doug Jones won his election because of the African American support that he had. 96% of African Americans voted for Doug Jones. So he has massive support from the black community, but he can't even commit to hiring 2 of them to his staff. Now, this is what Sean King, who was referenced in the question there by Jake Tapper, this is what Sean King thought of Doug Jones' reply. This is a non-committal answer from Doug Jones. We're not asking to answer your phones and vacuum your floors. Will you appoint African Americans to senior leadership positions? Chief of Staff, Legislative Director, General Counsel, Communications Director, and Deputy Chief of Staff. So Sean King also sees right through this answer from Doug Jones. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens. Now, let's go to the last clip, which addresses Al Franken and Trump.
In the wake of Al Franken's resignation, some of your Democratic colleagues have been calling for President Trump to resign because of the allegations against him, including Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, who recently campaigned for you in Alabama. Take a listen to Senator Booker.
Clearly, if we have a standard in which Al Franken is resigning, the president has had multiple more women come with a very clear fact pattern, and he should do the right thing and resign.
Do you agree with Senator Booker that President Trump should resign because of these allegations?
You know, Jake, where I am on that right now is that those allegations were made before the election. And so people had an opportunity to judge before that election. I think we need to move on and not get distracted by those issues. Let's get on with the real issues that are facing people of this country right now. And I don't think that the president ought to resign at this point. We'll see how things go. But certainly those allegations are not new. And he was elected with those allegations at front and center.
I guess the question is, why should Al Franken resign if there are even more horrific allegations about President Trump and no one is calling for him to step down?
Well, again, I go back to the fact that those allegations were made and he was elected president of the United States. And I think the American people spoke on that at this time. There's other things out there, but I think at this point we need to move on and try to work with some real issues that are facing the country and not worry about getting at odds with the president any more than we have to.
Okay, so I find it odd that the one time Doug Jones is straightforward with an answer, it's in protecting Donald Trump. So even though Al Franken is being forced out because of sexual misconduct allegations, Doug Jones apparently thinks that Trump shouldn't be under the same pressure. And his defense is that the allegations against Al Franken came after Al Franken became a senator, whereas the allegations against Trump came before Trump became the president. But he kind of, misses the whole point there that, yeah, since that's happened, there's been this Me Too movement, and it's pushed a lot of people out of their positions, out of high-profile positions, because of their past behavior, the past sexual misconduct behavior. But that doesn't apply to Donald Trump because we heard about them before. So it would have been better if we didn't hear about sexual misconduct allegations before, but then heard about them now. I mean, that's what he's saying. He's saying that the women should have waited until Trump became president and then started talking about them, because then they would be useful and then Trump should resign because they came after he became president. It doesn't make any sense. This whole, it's stupid. This is just Jones' way of avoiding the question, because he doesn't want to be seen as being too combative with the Republican Party. He's more focused on playing nice with Republicans than he is about defending Democrats. So that's who Doug Jones is. This is going to be another Joe Manchin. And I think if he continues on this way, it's very likely that he's going to lose the support of the Democratic base, and that he'll lose his next election to a Republican. Or maybe at some point be primaried out by a progressive that actually focuses on the base and gets out new voters that may have not voted in a while. But all this remains to be seen. But just from first impressions, I think it's quite clear that Doug Jones is more interested in being friends with Republicans than he is about fighting for anything progressive.